You buy a tool that costs less than a meal. No heavy casing, no reputation behind it, no promise that it will last. You expect it to fail, but it doesn't. Weeks go by, then months. It keeps working, quietly, reliably, almost unnoticed. At the same time, a tool you paid real money for, the one that looked tougher, sounded tougher, and came from a trusted brand, that one quits early. No warning, no abuse, just gone. So, here's the question most people never stop to examine. Why does the cheaper tool sometimes outlast the expensive one? And what does believing the wrong answer quietly cost you over time? This is not luck. It's not a manufacturing accident. And it's not because cheap tools are secretly better. There is a system behind these prices. A system that moves cost, risk, and responsibility away from the manufacturer and onto the buyer. Most people don't see it at the register. They only notice it after time has passed. If you've ever owned a tool that surprised you by lasting far longer than it should have, note that experience. We'll come back to it. Because the story of Harbor Freight is not about cheap tools. It's about how risk is quietly redistributed. If you value explanations that focus on systems rather than opinions, subscribe to Geologic. Most people treat Harbor Freight as a novelty, a place you visit out of curiosity, not trust. That assumption doesn't survive a closer look. Harbor Freight operates more than 1,600 stores across the United States and generates billions in annual revenue. Companies that reach that scale do not survive on randomness or low standards alone. They survive on systems that work consistently. The core idea is simple. Harbor Freight does not sell tools in the same way traditional brands do. It sells trade-offs. Every product is designed around how often it will be used, how much failure can be tolerated, and who absorbs the consequences when something goes wrong. The price is not an accident. It is the output of those decisions. This explains something many people notice but rarely connect. Some Harbor Freight tools last for years, others fail quickly. That inconsistency is not a breakdown in quality control. It is the expected result of a different optimization strategy. The consequence is subtle but important. If you judge Harbor Freight tools by professional standards, they often disappoint. If you judge them by occasional use standards, many perform exactly as designed. That distinction matters because misunderstanding it leads to false confidence on one end and unfair dismissal on the other. And before we look at factories or materials, we need to understand why the prices feel so unnatural in the first place. The obvious explanation is private labeling. Harbor Freight sells its own brands. No licensing fees, no distributor margins, no expensive marketing campaigns. That explains part of the price drop. But it does not explain why the prices feel implausibly low. The deeper reason is this. Harbor Freight is not trying to convince you that a single tool will last a lifetime. It is trying to remove hesitation from the purchase decision. Traditional tool brands sell certainty, durability, reputation built over decades. That certainty is expensive to manufacture and even more expensive to maintain. Harbor Freight sells access. Access to a tool right now, at a price low enough that you stop weighing alternatives. This changes the entire economic calculation. The question stops being, will this last forever? And becomes, is this worth it for this job? That shift explains why Harbor Freight prices don't compete directly with premium brands. They compete with delay, inconvenience, and indecision. The implication is important. Once hesitation disappears, volume increases. Once volume increases, margins can stay thin and still scale. This is not a quality strategy. It's a behavioral strategy, and it sets the stage for one of the most misunderstood claims about Harbor Freight. You've heard the claim before. Same factory, same tool, different logo. There is some truth in it, which is why it spreads so easily. Many Harbor Freight tools are produced in the same manufacturing facilities as tools sold under more expensive brand names. Sometimes they are even built on the same production lines. But this is where the explanation usually stops. And stopping here creates a false conclusion. Factories do not produce identical products by default. They produce tiers. Within the same building, one version of a tool may receive higher grade materials, tighter tolerances, longer testing cycles, and stricter inspections. Another version skips steps, uses simplified components, and moves faster through quality checks. Same shape does not mean same standard. Same factory does not mean same expectations. This is why two tools can look nearly identical on the outside and age very differently over time. One is built for predictable performance. The other is built for acceptable performance at the lowest possible cost. The consequence is confusion. Consumers see similarities and assume equivalence. When the tools perform differently, the explanation feels personal rather than structural. Understanding this distinction doesn't make Harbor Freight deceptive. It makes the system visible. And once the system is visible, a deeper pattern starts to emerge. Because the biggest difference is not where the tools are made. It's how much inconsistency the company is willing to accept. Most people think quality exists on a straight line. At one end, premium. At the other, cheap. That model doesn't explain Harbor Freight. The real difference is variance. High-end brands spend heavily to reduce variation between units. Tight tolerances, multiple inspection steps, narrow performance bands. That consistency is expensive, but it creates predictability. Harbor Freight makes a different calculation. It allows a wider range of acceptable outcomes. Some tools come off the line slightly better than average. Some slightly worse. Most fall into a broad middle that performs well enough for its intended use. This explains a pattern many people notice but rarely understand. Reviews split into extremes. One user reports a tool lasting a decade. Another reports failure in the first week. Neither experience is unusual. Both are expected. The consequence is subtle. Buyers who understand this variance treat Harbor Freight tools as situational. Buyers who don't often mistake early success for long-term reliability, and that mislearning compounds with every future purchase. That misunderstanding creates false confidence. And false confidence is where mistakes begin. This isn't actually a quality issue. It's a decision-making issue about where risk quietly accumulates. That line is not emotional. It's mechanical. A hand tool failing early wastes time. A power tool failing mid-project creates frustration. But some tools exist in a different category entirely. Load-bearing equipment, lifting devices, and safety-critical tools do not fail gently. When tolerances stack in the wrong direction, failure becomes abrupt and unforgiving. This is why recalls in these categories matter more than reviews. They reveal what happens when acceptable variance meets physical limits. The issue is not that these tools were cheap. The issue is that the margin for error was misjudged. This is the point where many buyers realize too late that not all tools should be evaluated using the same logic. A model that works well for occasional use accessories does not translate cleanly to equipment where failure has immediate consequences. The implication is straightforward. Price alone is not a risk indicator. Function matters more. If a tool failing only costs you time, variance is manageable. If a tool failing puts weight, force, or motion where it doesn't belong, variance becomes unacceptable. This is not fear. It's alignment. And alignment becomes even clearer once you understand how Harbor Freight handles failure after the sale. At first glance, Harbor Freight warranties feel generous. Easy replacements, clear policies, optional extended coverage. But warranties are not apologies. They are economic tools. Eliminating every potential defect is expensive. Replacing a percentage of failures is cheaper, especially when most buyers never file a claim. Receipts get lost, time passes, tools sit unused. The math accounts for all of it. From a business perspective, replacing failed units costs less than tightening quality control across the entire production run. The warranty absorbs the visible failures. The pricing absorbs the rest. The consequence for buyers is not obvious at checkout. It appears later when a tool fails outside the coverage window or when replacement becomes inconvenient. This doesn't make the warranty deceptive. It makes it integral. Once you see warranties as part of the pricing structure, not an act of goodwill, the rest of the model starts to make sense. And that understanding changes how the store itself feels. Because the system doesn't end at the product. It continues through the environment designed to sell it. Harbor Freight stores feel calm by design. No urgency, no pressure, no performance theater. Prices are low enough to quiet internal debate. Once doubt disappears, comparison stops. Then comes structure. Basic options on one side, mid-tier in the center, premium house brands on the other. The cheapest feels risky. The most expensive feels unnecessary. The middle feels sensible. This layout is not random. It nudges buyers toward the option that feels responsible without feeling indulgent. Membership pricing reinforces the effect. Once someone pays to access discounts, every purchase feels like reclaiming value rather than spending money. Visits become easier to justify. Frequency increases. The implication is not manipulation. It's efficiency. Harbor Freight does not force decisions. It removes friction from them. But understanding this only matters if you know what the system is actually optimized to do. That's where most debates about Harbor Freight fall apart. Most arguments about Harbor Freight fail because they assume one standard of use. That standard doesn't exist. Harbor Freight is not optimized for daily abuse. It is optimized for intermittent reality. Most tools in America are not used 8 hours a day. They are used occasionally, sometimes once, then stored for long periods. Designing for that pattern changes every decision that follows. Materials can be thinner. Motors can run cooler because they rarely run long. Tolerances can be wider because wear accumulates slowly. For a professional, this feels unacceptable. For a homeowner, it often works perfectly. The mistake happens when buyers cross those contexts without realizing it. When an occasional use tool is treated like a career tool, disappointment follows. When a career tool is bought for occasional use, money is often wasted. The consequence is not broken tools. It's mismatched expectations. Once you understand what Harbor Freight is optimized for, the debate stops being emotional. It becomes situational. And that makes it possible to evaluate purchases more clearly. Professionals judge tools by predictability. They need consistent performance day after day. Variance is the enemy. DIY buyers judge tools by outcome. Did it work? Did it finish the job? Did it save time or money? Neither standard is wrong. They simply solve different problems. The conflict arises when one group assumes their standard should apply universally. A contractor dismisses a tool that lasted 3 projects but failed on the 4th. A homeowner praises the same tool because it finished the only project they needed. Both experiences are valid. Both are incomplete. The implication is subtle but important. Advice without context becomes misleading. This is why blanket recommendations rarely hold up. Tools don't fail in isolation. They fail within patterns of use. Understanding that context doesn't make decisions easier. It makes them accurate. And accuracy matters when the cost of being wrong is more than inconvenience. Instead of memorizing brand tiers or chasing opinions, there is a simpler framework. Ask one question: what happens if this tool fails? If failure costs time, frustration, or a redo, risk is manageable. This is where low-cost tools perform well. If failure affects measurement, alignment, or calibration, risk increases. Precision does not tolerate inconsistency. If failure involves weight, force, or rapid motion, risk becomes unacceptable. In these cases, variance is no longer a trade-off, it is a liability. This framework doesn't rely on brand loyalty. It relies on consequences. The mistake most buyers make is assuming all tools carry the same kind of risk. They don't. Once you categorize tools by what failure actually costs, decisions become clearer. Cheaper is sometimes smarter. Sometimes it isn't. That clarity sets up the final piece of the picture. Because there is a force outside Harbor Freight's control that may change this entire equation. Everything discussed so far assumes one condition: that ultra-low prices remain possible. That assumption is fragile. Harbor Freight's model depends on cost structures that leave little room for shock. When shipping, materials, or trade conditions change, the lowest tier feels it first. Small increases don't just raise prices. They eliminate categories. A tool that moves from cheap enough to try to cheap but questionable occupies a dangerous middle ground. It stops being disposable without becoming durable. The consequence is not collapse. It's quiet change. Fewer extreme bargains, more mid-tier offerings, a slow shift in what the store represents. Most buyers won't notice this transition until habits stop working the way they used to. Which brings us to the final question: What does Harbor Freight actually mean for the buyer who understands the system? Harbor Freight's system works because costs stay low enough for trade-offs to make sense. That condition is not guaranteed. The company relies heavily on overseas manufacturing, lean margins, and predictable logistics. When those inputs remain stable, prices stay low and variance is manageable. When they don't, the entire structure tightens. The first thing to disappear is not quality, it's forgiveness. As costs rise, the cheapest tools lose their cushion. What was once acceptable risk starts to feel like a bad bet. Tools that were never meant to compete with mid-tier brands suddenly have to. This doesn't force a collapse. It forces a repositioning. Harbor Freight adapts by nudging buyers upward. More mid-tier house brands, fewer extreme bargains, subtle shifts that change how the store feels without announcing anything at all. The implication is simple. Strategies that worked 5 years ago may not work the same way 5 years from now. Buyers who assume the past guarantees the future are the ones most likely to misjudge value. The smartest buyers don't chase price. They match tools to consequences. They use low-cost tools where failure is tolerable. They spend more where failure compounds. They don't confuse early success with long-term reliability. They don't assume professional standards apply to occasional use. And they don't assume occasional use tools belong in professional roles. This mindset removes frustration before it starts. It also removes brand loyalty from the decision-making process, not because brands don't matter, but because context matters more. Once buyers understand the system, Harbor Freight stops being unpredictable. It becomes readable. And readable systems are easier to navigate. Harbor Freight is not a shortcut. It is not a trap. And it is not a miracle. It is a company that understands how most people actually use tools and builds a system around that reality. That system rewards buyers who understand trade-offs. It punishes buyers who assume all tools carry the same risk. The difference between a good experience and a bad one is rarely the tool itself. It's whether the buyer understood what they were purchasing and acted with intention instead of assumption. And that understanding is what ultimately saves time, money, and effort. Once you see the logic behind the prices, the confusion disappears. You stop asking why something is cheap. You start asking what problem it was designed to solve. That shift changes everything. Before you go, leave one last comment. What's one Harbor Freight purchase you'd make again without hesitation, and one you wouldn't repeat? And if this kind of clear, system-level breakdown helps you think more accurately about the world around you, subscribe to GeoLogic. Because understanding how systems work is always cheaper than learning the hard way.